Welcome to another episode of the HaskinCast Podcast. I am your host, Scott Haskin. What are we on? Episode 441, I think, if I'm not mistaken. Getting up there, close to 450 anyway. And I am so excited. We've been talking about this for like 5 years now. Tommy is back on the show. Tommy Schaeffer. How are you doing, Tommy?
I'm good. I've even unmuted my mic just for you.
Well, that does help to make it a two-way conversation. That's for sure.
Keeps it professional, doesn't it?
You're on land. How long have you been on land this time?
It's been a bit, actually. It feels like forever. But July 1st, I got back July 1st, and late on July 1st. So really it was like July 2nd. Excuse me. Land sickness kicking in.
Yeah.
But yeah, July 1st. So it's been July, all of July, August, and okay, it's only 2 months. It feels
Wow,
like.
that's been a long stretch for you, though. That's pretty abnormal.
It is. It's longer than usual, but it's a great. It's been a great break here. I'm here at Dad's house, hanging out and helping Dad. But I've been here long enough to put up a little place to speak at you from. So I'm excited.
Yeah,
and
nice and
this was
cozy.
unpacked from a pod. And I sold everything in Phoenix and left the house in Phoenix in 2020. And I had this cool stone column packed up forever. And I thought, you know what? I'm going to unwrap that and put it in the corner of the room. It's going to look. And as I'm carrying it in from the garage, like, it's nice and sturdy still. And I had saran wrapped the living crap out of it. And as I'm undoing it, like, getting kind of wobbly. I don't. It doesn't.
No.
It's a rigid structure, and I was like, "Oh no, this didn't make it." Nothing else got broken. Knock on wood, because I haven't looked at everything, but but I think it looks just as good in a crumbling format. It's like a ruin now.
Yeah,
Roman ruins, and not a.
I was going to say it's probably a little more accurate to today's world for what most of those columns would look like. And no, I could see how it would look nice complete as one piece, but I think it has some character that way.
Yeah. What I need to touch up and get rid of that blaze white, obviously plaster of Paris on the edge there.
Right. Yeah. Just kind of antique that a little bit, and you'll be fine. Yeah. No, that's a cool piece though. So everything that you had in Phoenix, you're done. Like there's nothing left there. You're 100% out of Phoenix now.
Just memories, and my sister is left in Phoenix, and lots of friends.
Well, I hope if you wrap her up, she doesn't come apart like your pillar did.
Don't wrap up the little sister.
You had a cool house there. I will say I really liked that house. It had a lot of character. It was nice to spend a couple of days there shooting and getting to know you and some of the other people I hadn't worked with yet. And of course, Ellen Muth, who was the star of the film. I still have a lot of good memories over that couple days we were over there.
Yeah, that was our first real face-to-face encounter, right?
Yeah.
What's really funny about that, Scott, is old Facebook never quits. But just yesterday or the day before, a memory popped up of a whole slew of photos from that shoot, and it's like, man, I can't believe we're on because we were already scheduled to talk. I can't believe we're gonna have I've got Scott on the schedule, and that memory just popped up. It was like 14 years ago.
Yeah, but it was September. I think it was either late August or early September when we shot that, because it was still pretty hot out.
Ember, I remember. Yeah, it was whatever month that is in Arizona, which is most of them, I guess.
And scary enough, here in Vegas, we are today appears, according to my weather app that seems to change every day, our last triple-digit day before what I will expect will be the first autumn tease. I'm sure we'll get another round of hot days.
I thought you were going into quadruple digits for a second.
No, not quite. But I do have a bucket to pour myself into, should that be the case. But by next Thursday, we'll be down in the low 80s as our high. And I'm like, yeah, I'm sure that's going to change, because I don't think it's going to get that cold that fast. But you know what's really weird here today? I had to walk down to the post office, and it's really hazy out, and everything smells like burnt wood. And I thought, oh, this is from the California fires. And I thought, man, if it's that bad here, what are the people there dealing with? Like, it's got to be unbreathable.
I remember that just from Phoenix. Like, there would be a layer of ash on the car. Like, if it's coming this far.
Yeah. And that's you figure like a 5-6 hour drive from Phoenix to wherever the fires are for the ash to carry that far in the air and be that thick on your car to be noticeable. That's just insane.
Yeah, I was seeing it every year. It happened right around this time. Yeah.
But let me ask you, so when you're
Yes,
out
sir.
on the water, this just leads me to this question. I mean, the air's got to be pretty pristine out there, I would imagine. You're just out in the middle of nothing. There's no pollution other than maybe other boats that have been by, but it's just got to smell really good all the time.
You have brought up a really neat point.
Yeah.
That is very, very true. And it could be days out there, weeks sometimes. And I think we have done a trip that was about a month. So it's been about, it could be anywhere from a couple days to a couple weeks. You get used to it
Mhm.
so much so that I forget about it, or I acclimate is the word.
Mhm.
And but it's amazing when you get not necessarily in sight of land, but when you get close enough to smell things, it's over freaking whelming. The stuff,
Yeah.
and instantly. And I think every time I always, maybe it's because of the places we do sail to, but almost always the first thing is some type of campfire, some distant, delicious something cooking on the fire,
Mhm.
and then it's just a plethora of things that come closer and closer. And then, of course, the sounds come in, and yeah, but
Yeah.
it's a very single-threaded soundtrack out there. Single-threaded is a horrible name because there's a million sounds, but
Mhm.
you grow accustomed to them all, and it becomes this constant chorus of things.
I didn't even think about the audio, and that's normally the first thing my mind would have gone to, you
Right,
know.
right.
But yeah, so I mean, I imagine you've got the sound of waves lapping, you've got the engine of the boat, and then you've got probably birds that are circling looking for fish or food of some sort. Maybe some splashing of some fish or sea creatures. What else would you have out there?
I love it. I love that you've listed some things that are rarer and infrequent, more infrequent than I think you might think. Uh,
Really? Okay.
Now, waves, of course, you'll always hear, and
Yeah.
there's several types of waves that are going to be happening while you're out there. As the boat moves, well, the one thing you mentioned that we hear often on deliveries, but we hate it the most, that is the sound of the engine. And when you're on a schedule and an owner's paying your captain a daily salary to get the boat from point A to point B and then hopefully point C without going to D or Q,
Mhm.
you're the engine's usually on, and it's usually on 24/7, and it stinks. It's loud. It gets even louder when you have to go check fluids and things. We usually do that every 3 hours. Uh,
Wow.
it's the worst sound, and it's the worst sound of sailing. The engine,
Well, it
and
kills all the tranquility, right? I mean,
it
it's
really
like
does.
there
It
would
sort
just
of
be
does.
nothing
Other
in.
times, it creates this amazing white noise, like it's almost dangerous. Like if I'm in a cabin that's right next to the engine,
Mhm.
good luck. The mast could probably come down, and I'll be like, just sleeping
Wow.
right through it because it's so loud. It's just
Mhm.
you don't
Oh,
hear.
right, yeah.
But but yeah, so you'll hear when the engine is off. It's a wonderful thing, and you will hear as the boat is moving. It creates its own waves, so you'll hear that wave, and you'll hear your bow wave. You'll hear your wake, but then you also hear waves way out in the distance, depending on the weather, and then you'll hear them close to you, which sound way different because they're at you and they're breaking and they're hitting you. Sometimes they're coming on board, and so it's and they're all different sounds, and it's just this wonderful chorus of you get used to a cadence, and then every so often there's something arrhythmic. You're like, what's that? Something's broken. And you put all your senses just completely zoom in on trying to determine whether it's a friendly sound or not. It's that's what we're
Right.
doing almost 24/7 on a boat. Is like
Mhm.
you step on and it's chaos. Before you get to know the boat, you're like the boom squeaks, the lines chafe, the sails shouldn't make a noise if they're trimmed properly. They don't flap, but they often do flap because you're not always trimmed perfectly.
Mhm.
Things squeak, deck squeaks, water comes in and out, drains gurgle as the water goes out. You hear
Sure,
a boat,
yeah.
like you say, and all of that is like, "Ah!" But after a day of that, you're like, huh, it's all natural, and you almost don't hear any of it, but you'll hear the one thing that changes, and you get a new squeak, or you get a new deeper chafe, or you get a thump every third second instead of every eighth second. You're like, that's new, WTF.
Right.
And then you go into investigation mode. You're like, so oftentimes the boat will tell you what's breaking way before it breaks, and it's kind of neat. But
That's good. I would kind of equate that to when I worked in a music store because I could walk by a person jamming away on a guitar through an amp, beating on a drum set, and not even notice it. Like at first, it was a really difficult job to get used to because there's just noise everywhere, all
everywhere,
around
yeah,
you. It's not in harmony with anything. Like it's just a bunch of random noises at the same time. But after a while, you kind of like, you just don't even notice it anymore. Your brain kind of goes, I don't really need to care about that. But your brain is probably triggered to go, okay, but if I don't need to worry about this, but if something changes, I do need to be worried about that.
exactly right. Like if you're on that job and you hear the guitars are always jamming over there, the drum demos are always happening there, the cash register is beeping here,
Mhm.
but all of a sudden there's this chirp over here, and you're like, "Oh, that sounds like the smoke alarm's battery that needs to be
Right.
replaced." You know,
Yeah.
you'll hear
Yeah.
that tiny little thing through
Mhm.
this ridiculous sea of sound, and people are like, "How the hell did you hear that?" It's like, "How do you not?" But
Yeah. Well, I remember the first time I went to Huntington Beach with a friend of mine, I was just sitting in the sand. I hadn't been to the ocean in decades. And I just remember sitting in the sand and thinking, I wonder how much I could get if I sold everything I owned, how much it would take to buy a boat. Could I build the studio on the boat? Would I be able to get internet? And basically like doing what you do, except without working the boat part that you do, and just kind of like living there instead of an apartment, like just,
yeah,
being
is
able
this
to take
when
off
we
and,
were chatting and I sent you a picture of the one boat because we were at the place we were at, or was this
oh,
before?
this was before I met you.
Long ago.
Yeah,
Okay. Oh,
couple years before I met you. And I mean, I had no idea what it would cost. I don't know anything about, what that like existing in that way would mean, like how you store enough food and all that stuff, whether it's feasible or not. But I was just like in my mind, I was like, is that something I could actually make work? Could I write while I'm rocking back and forth on the waves? I don't really
oh,
know how that would go. So
all
it,
right.
it it quickly went out of my head, but for about a good 45 minutes, I was selling everything I owned.
45 minutes. 'Cause I
So,
remember, I think you had mentioned that you're not a fan of the water. You're maybe not thalassophobia, but if it's deep and below you a lot, you're just like, no thanks, not
well,
where I like.
that's for if I'm in it. So, like, if I'm out swimming, yeah, I'm not a fan of swimming. I'm hydrophobic. But to be out on the water in a boat, or to be, even walking along the shore and letting the water get up to my knees or maybe halfway up my thighs, I'm perfectly fine with that. But to be like out in the open water on my own, yeah,
Ah,
that I can't do,
I think
because I almost
anyone who
drowned when I
likes
was really
that
young.
is a little bit different. That's
Yeah.
scary for anybody.
Well, it usually stems from some kind of experience. Like I had a really bad experience, almost drowned when I was really young. So, from there, that kind of puts a damper on putting yourself in a position where you might die. And rather unpleasantly, I would I would add.
Yeah.
But I do love the water. I think it's one of the most tranquil and beautiful places on this planet. And I love going to the beach and just spending the day with the surf coming in and out. And it's just so amazing for me. For you, you're working so much. How much of it do you actually get to really just enjoy the piece of it all?
Ah, what a great question. Because yeah, it's most of these trips to date have been training passages and deliveries. At least the big ones. There are a couple of vacation ones in there, but and yeah, so there's a lot of the time you're working, but a lot of the work is super fun. I think of it like I call them the dots and lines. Like we're on the boat and we're drawing lines all around the earth, but there's a dot on either side of the line where the trip had originated from and where we ended up. And as much as I can. Every trip doesn't work out as well as possible, as well as some, but at every chance I get, I try to stay at the dot as long as I can. So put some time in, and that's usually when we really enjoy the place and get to see what Mazatlan's about, or what Barcelona's about, or Lisbon, or St. Mary's, Georgia, or wherever you end up
Mhm.
being. Yeah, but and even when we're out there, it's technically 24/7 work, 24/7, but it's part of your work is to be a, a strong, ready for anything sailor, which means eating well, sleeping well, and taking care of your hygiene and health too. So, brushing your teeth, combing your hair, washing the sticky parts as much as you can. Because we
Sure.
barely take showers when you're out there, because there's many times where you're on a boat that A, doesn't have that kind of water capacity, or B, you're just out there so long where you have to conserve. Some trips have been pretty posh though, where you have a water maker on board and you can take a shower. Like, oh my God, I don't know what to do. I'm clean.
A water maker?
Yeah, yeah.
So
Takes
does
hydrogen
that
and oxygen and squeezes them together. I'm just kidding.
no, but that takes like ocean water and takes the salt out, and I would
Yes,
imagine,
yeah.
yeah.
It's a funny
I
name
like your
because
idea though. That's something we should have.
yeah, because that's a water maker. Like, we're
Right.
scientists and engineers. We know
Sure.
that, like, to make water, you take two hydrogens and one oxygen and you smash them together, and it takes a whole fuck ton of energy to do that, right? But yeah, so water makers sound really cool in space age, but it's a desalinator is a much better word for it.
Right. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's the word I was looking for, right.
yeah. Some
Yeah.
are really slow, but others, I mean, you could take 30 gallons an hour, and it just takes a ton of ocean water, super high pressure, pushes it through the teeniest little holes, and dumps all the goop overboard, and puts the fresh water in your tanks.
Nice. I would imagine though that let's say so you said you check the engine fluids about every 3 hours or so. I would imagine when you're done with that and done with the duties and you have a few minutes, there's got to be times when you just gaze out at the water and
Oh
just
yeah,
really
yeah.
appreciate what you've got there.
Yes, for sure. There's a lot of times I wonder where the hell did the day go? Like how, we really don't have anything to do, right?
Mhm.
And so, like, it's 24 hour. Well, it depends on the schedule, obviously, that like what kind of sleep schedules we're doing. Um, but uh, but yeah, it's amazing to me still to this day how fast the I'm sorry, the TV keeps coming on and off
Oh,
back
that's
there.
all
Let
right.
me know if it's distracting. I'll turn it out. I'll turn it completely
Okay.
off.
Thanks, buddy.
Uh, you got it. Sorry. The techies will always be both filmmakers and guests and producers at the same time.
Impossible to be any less.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
for
can't. Yeah,
sure.
ask
For
my
sure.
dad whenever we watch TV. He's like, "How?" I'll be like, "Oh, look at his! I can see his mic." Like and he's like, "How do you see that?" I'm like, "How do you know? How do you not?"
Yep. I'm always like shadow of the boom cord.
Yeah, yeah. Like, oh man,
Uh,
fascinating. Yeah, or
yeah.
just hear like I'm like, "Oh, that's oh man, they had to use the worst audio possible." Anyway, long story short. But yeah, back to
Yeah,
sailing.
heard that a lot too. Well, so I mentioned birds earlier, but I'm thinking about it now. Do you actually get a lot of birds that are just out in in the midst of everything?
We do, and it's amazing how far offshore you'll see them. But the saying is also true. I don't know if it's a saying, but um, when you're really far out there, you don't see anything except for whales and dolphins. Man, you see so many dolphins. It's depending on where you are, of course. But as you get closer to land, you're going to see a lot more species of birds because some stay close, others go far. But
Yeah.
the farthest I've ever been, we've always still seen birds, and it's fun because sometimes, I remember a couple of great stories involving birdies, like simple ones like it's raining and thundering and lightning, and it's just shitty weather or good sailing weather, depends on how you look at
Mhm.
it. And you'll have birds just come on board and perch and join you because they're like, "F that crap." There's a thing floating here that I could get a free ride on, and they're
Sure.
always joining and pooping on your crap, and it's fascinating how unafraid they are of the potential risk because the other risk is greater. It's safer to risk whatever the heck those things are, i.e.
Mhm.
humans, moving around on that
Right.
floating thing. They'll risk it and sit on board for a while.
Well, if they're out there in the wild, they haven't learned to fear humans yet, I would
That's
imagine.
true too. Yeah, there's
Yeah.
a lot of remote places where we're just a thing that they haven't seen, and they might be curious.
Yeah. I remember at Newport Beach, which is my favorite spot on earth. One time I met a friend of mine for lunch there, and there was this pelican on the pier. And this is a pier where hundreds of people walk up and down it every day to, go look at the ocean, to go fish, to go to the restaurant at the end or whatever. And there's this pelican, pretty big, like a good 3.5 feet tall. And he's just like standing there looking at everybody walking by, and kids are going up to him, and he's like not even flinching. And I'm like,
That's the other side
damn.
of the equation where he's just so used to people being around all the time that
Yeah.
basically his food source, right? The people are feeding him and all.
But I'm thinking this whole time, like, he's still a pelican. He could just swallow that child whole and not even think
Yeah,
twice about it, you know?
yeah.
But he was pretty cool. He didn't hurt anybody. But then a couple, I saw him again the next year when I went, and then the next year he didn't come back anymore. So who knows? Maybe he found another peer, or ate a
Found
child or
another
something.
peer. He disappeared.
Disappeared. But so let me ask you though, how do you prepare? So like, what's the average length of a trip for you?
Ah, so yeah, this is fun to answer because when we talked last time, it was 2019.
You were really just getting started.
I was, and I didn't
Yeah.
realize what was to come, which is neat. Of course, no one
Yeah.
does. Nobody sees the future. But
Right.
looking back was so neat today because it's like, what did I? Holy moly, 2019. That means blah blah blah. So so around 2017, late 17 into 18, I started sailing, and that was in Phoenix with my friend Dave. And the Phoenix sailing community was on Lake Pleasant, and now soon to be Tempe Town Lake, which wasn't always there, of course. But
Mhm.
um, uh, well, anyway, and in those years, we would sail at Lake Pleasant on the weekends and race, and it was a great Saturday and Sunday event, and sometimes Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and then we'd go to San Diego and on weekends at least once a month, if not once a quarter. It
Wow.
turned out to be more than once a quarter. And we would sail Friday, Saturday, Sunday in San Diego on the bay. And those are like 3-day trips. Um, but we never really went offshore. We never went offshore on those trips. We just went from, we would rent the boats at this place called Seaforth. I don't know if I could say them on your podcast
Sure.
with
Yeah.
sponsorship. That'd be awesome if
The
they gave us some
dollar
money.
sign just start
Yeah.
piling up on the screen. Yeah.
Uh, Go and put it there or
What's the cash? Yeah. Right.
wherever, and wherever we end up on the screen. Click here for 20% off promo code. Um, but they didn't allow you to keep the boat overnight and out there, but
Oh.
you can go out all day, and then you didn't have to come home to where you rented it from. You could take it to any of the 4 locations that they had in San Diego. So it was really great. They had a location in Mission Bay, which was on the Pacific coast, and they had locations in Coronado and Glorieta Bay, which is in the San Diego Bay,
Mhm.
and one was right downtown. So like we would rent the boat by the airport. We could from Phoenix fly to San Diego, walk from the airport to the marina to pick up the
Wow.
rental with minimal gear, and then we'd sail around the bay all day, and then park the boat uh, in downtown San Diego,
Mhm.
tie up, and then go and mess around in downtown San Diego, but then be able to come back to the boat and sleep there. This is not even answering your question, but I hope you enjoyed the
So
story. I'm realizing.
you didn't have to return the boat, but you had to dock it at one of their stations overnight, but
By
you could keep
sunset, we'd have to
possession of
leave,
it. It
and
just
then
had to
yeah,
be there.
yeah, and it would be like
Okay.
$200 for a 23.9 hour rental. Like as long as
That's
you
it?
super cheap, dude. Yeah, and that's for a
Wow.
boat that takes 4 people. So it's that divided by 4,
Yeah, it's
basically.
like $50 a day.
Yeah. So then think about how that's when it really changed my life. I was like, oh my God, sailing is amazing because we would park at the marina, literally at the foot of the Hyatt or the Sheraton in downtown Phoenix, where you show up there and try to get a room on the day. $500, right?
Yeah.
$200, easy. Probably not 200, probably more than that. But so we have the boat and our room and our entertainment for $50. 200 if
Yeah.
you go 4 days for each person, whatever.
You
Yeah,
can't even
no,
get a cheap motel for that now.
yeah. Or and if you get a motel for that price, I don't know, you're a lot safer on a boat.
You won't be the only living creature in it, I'll say
Yeah,
that.
yeah. You would be safer offshore,
And there was a
with
place I
no
stayed
knowledge
in,
of sailing, probably.
where was that place in Phoenix? I don't even remember where I was at. I had reservations that got screwed up. I ended up having to find a motel. I was exhausted. I had just driven in from Vegas, was going to one of the Comic-Con type events, and my scheduling had gotten screwed up somehow, and the motel wasn't ready. They didn't have a room for me for that night. I scrambled to find another place, and I literally just slept on top of the covers like this, just like peering around every once in a while and watching to see if anything was crawling on the bed. Not a fan.
Not a fan.
And even
Sounds
that,
like
I think I paid like
27th,
$80 for.
Street, and sounds like 27th Ave and Van Buren, if I'm to be precise.
It wouldn't surprise me if it was around. It was not the nicest area. It was just where I was at the moment.
Yeah, and my apologies to anyone who lives on the corner of 27th and Van Buren. I don't know anything about it, but I
Yeah.
probably just picked. Probably one of our friends lives there now. And I'm like, oh,
I think I was a little further southeast than that, more like into like a little bit even seedier of an area than that, because I would have been at least familiar with that general like Camelback and the avenues and all that. I was a little further away than that, and yeah, but I lived. Don't worry, I'm okay.
Spoiler alert! You made it.
Yeah, I should have led with that, I suppose.
Yeah. But
But
your
no, man,
question
that's
originally was something
amazing.
about
Yeah,
the
that's a
length of
great
trip,
deal. Yeah,
right?
so I'm wondering, like how long is your when you go to pick up a boat and deliver it? What's like the average time that you're out at any given time?
We have had trips ranging anywhere from 4 to 5 days to 45 days. Yeah,
Wow.
yeah. This last one was incredible. Actually, it was. We did it in two parts. Started in Panama City, Panama, and ended in Crescent City, California. So it's basically, oh man, almost all of North America, the western
Mhm.
coast, because North America stops at Panama, which I only learned recently, by the way.
Oh,
Full disclosure, I thought North America ended at Mexico, and there was North America, Central America, and South America. And I'm kind of an idiot. I forgot that. Well, I guess I didn't think Central America, but I thought Central America and South America were the South American continent, and North America was Canada, USA, and Mexico. But North America is Canada, USA, Mexico, and all of Central America, ending in Panama, and then Colombia in South America
right. Yeah.
begins South America. So yeah, quick geography lesson for everyone.
I
Uh,
only learned that because in my, I want to say it was probably my history class, because I don't think I ever had a geography class in high school. But I remember that Panama was like the big divide between that was like the gap between the two countries.
yeah, yeah. And there's
Yeah.
no man's land. There's a big desert area in Panama, but before you get to Colombia, that's basically like nobody goes there.
I just heard about that. And you know
It's
what's really
really
funny
intense.
is it was like a video that had popped up on my Instagram. They said, "Have you heard of the no man's land in South
Yeah,
America?" I'm like, "No." And I take everything on, with a grain of salt, because anybody can say anything and overdub videos with their own audio and whatever. But they're like, yeah, it's really bad. The weather's so bad that they can't build roads. And it's really harsh climate. It's about 100 miles across. And there's also these gangs that patrol it. And I'm like, well, wait a minute. If the weather is so bad that you
yeah,
can't
yeah.
even build a road, what are these gangs guarding? Like, why are
What are
you
they
even
guarding?
there?
There you go. Oh man, what are they guarding?
Yeah, and what is it that you're protecting? A bunch of weather. So I don't know, that it seemed a little bit fishy the way they explained it, but I do understand that, yeah, there's about 100-mile stretch that you really don't want to be in.
So that trip was all along that west coast, and we did it in two spots. We made it all the way up to Mazatlan, Mexico, which is the um, still south of Baja,
Mhm.
California. We made that for 3 weeks. Took 3 weeks, maybe 4 weeks on that one. I have to look. I should have.
Wow.
I should look. I have that written down.
So, but when you do those trips, like you come into port for a night, or are you like in the boat the whole time?
It depends too. Most to the this particular one, we were with the owner and another crew member who was a volunteer, who, by the way, was a killer, awesome crew, um, equal if not better than me, and you know,
Wow.
she had the same amount of miles that I had, and just was volunteering on boats. And we had a great conversation because I was like, "Man, you are so skilled. You could be getting paid to do this." She's like, "What?" I was like, "Yeah, you need to be charging for your time because, like, yeah, the minute I would think of something, I'd be down below and like I'd hear a sound. I'm like, we need to go adjust the whisker pole. That sounds bad, and I'll get out of my bunk, climb out, look up, and like she's already on it. So it's like we're a really good crew because we barely had to communicate because but the captain was a owner. He wasn't a captain, and he had no sailing experience, very little sailing experience, but tons of experience on boats. But the sailboat was new for him,
Uh,
so he brought us on because we knew sails, which is really exciting because to that point, I really have never been the most experienced person on a boat, and I always joked and say I'm not ready to be the most experienced person on a boat because I have very little experience and I don't
mhm.
want to be the most experienced person on a boat. And then
Yeah.
when this trip came up, I was like, holy shit, I'm gonna be the most experienced person on the boat. Until I learned from him that he has lots of time at sea. But he told me when he brought me on, he's like, I have no experience sailing. I immediately assumed that meant he has no experience on a boat sailing, not
Right,
no
right.
experience on the ocean. So
Mhm.
it was a neat thing that I got prepared for mentally, and I was like, I'm gonna do it because now's the time. And then it became this much easier situation. I still had to know everything about sailing, luckily the girl who joined me was a killer. She was a physicist and a biochemist, and was
Wow.
like dabbling in math. So like
Mhm.
she didn't know much about sailing, but she knew everything about physics. So all I had to do was like draw a quick force diagram for her. She was like, "Oh, okay, I got this." So it was like she was instant. She knew aerodynamics, but just didn't. She just needed to know what points of the sail we need to apply this to, and it would be like an 8-minute conversation, and she'd be like fully up to speed. It was
But you know what I
awesome.
really love about that is that you identified a communication barrier, right? You're like, she doesn't know the terms that I would normally explain things in, and you found a way to work around that and communicate with her. I feel like that's a really big lost art because
Oh,
it's
cool.
more like nowadays you have to understand what I'm saying the way I want to say it instead of let me understand how you learn and let me teach you that way.
Yeah, and then give me a day to think about it, and I'll come back with a new syllabus that we're not gonna talk about, the draft of the sail or the leach or the luff. We're gonna talk about trailing edge, the low pressure zone and a high pressure zone, and, the
Mhm.
physics of the sail, and
Yeah.
that's like an airplane wing, and they're like, "Whoop, now it's a sail. Now it's
Mhm.
an airplane wing. Now it's a sail."
That's
It
so
was
cool. And now you've met another connection that if you need somebody that, has her
oh,
skills, you've got somebody you can reach out to and somebody
yeah.
you've built a trust with, obviously, as well.
Yeah, she
Um,
was killer. She's
but
top of
what
the list when we need crew.
what I'm wondering is, so you're out, let's say 30 days, it's gonna be a 30-day trip. How do you plan food for a four-person crew, possible delays? Like, how do you put that together? Because that's a pretty important component.
That's such a great question, and
I mean, I suppose you could fish, but you can't depend on the
you
fact that
can't
there's gonna
depend
be
on that,
stuff.
right?
Yeah,
And we never have depended on it, but we've definitely been really happy when we caught shit. We're like,
sure, yeah.
yeah. Oh man, the funniest time we caught a tuna was we hadn't been catching anything, and I think, oh man, this was on the trip with Patricia, the girl we were just talking about. I think, yeah, and she had just, or either me or her, we were both the ones cooking, and she was really good at cooking too. But we had cracked open a bunch of cans of tuna and made this awesome tuna salad on the pita bread, and we had the fishing rod in the water every day. You take it in, we bring it in during the night because you don't want to catch something while we're at nighttime because you want to have a focus on the sailing aspects of things because
Right.
a lot can go wrong and we don't need to be doing shit at night. Yeah, it's a whole other story, exciting story.
Mhm.
But yeah, And I remember it was like I took my last bite of this delicious tuna wrap that she made, and it was and we caught a blackfin tuna. I'm like,
Wow.
oh my god, I just gorged on fucking bumblebee tuna. Like you got the real deal on the line, and I felt it was so dumb.
And you're pulling him in and going, I just ate your cousin.
That's what we literally said. We're like, oh, I don't think you want to come up here and see what we did, buddy.
Well, how big was it though? Because tunas, I mean, those things can weigh hundreds of pounds, right?
It wasn't that big, but it was a nice size, like 30-pounder. I think we got that one. Maybe 25. Yeah. Yeah, those are
Wow,
not.
that's pretty sizable though. I mean, that's a
Yeah.
good chunk of meat.
It was definitely tons of meat that we just put in we had a freezer luckily on this trip,
Mhm.
and it was the first time, not this trip, but another trip similar. I don't think it was a blackfin, but maybe a bluefin tuna, or I still can't tell them apart because they don't technically have a blue or black fin. But I
Mhm.
was like, how do you know that's a black fin? I would think it's a black fin, but they both look the same to me. And
I just
they're
know which one
slightly
I
black.
order at the sushi place, you know?
They don't have fins.
That's right, yeah.
Yeah,
No, that's awesome though, but I would think that, like, that's okay, we're gonna fish and see what we can get, but we have to be prepared that we may not catch anything at all, so we have to have enough food to
yeah,
be able to get through. So canned, obviously, there's gonna be a lot of cans because you don't need refrigeration for that, but I would imagine there's some fresh things that you bring along. I mean, you've gotta also have a balanced diet. Like you said, taking care of yourself is
yeah.
very important on these trips, so you have to be able to eat well on top of that.
A delightful friend of mine and super talented sailor. His name is John Kretschmer. He says being on a boat is no excuse for poor hygiene or poor health or eating badly. I paraphrase. He has a much more eloquent way of saying it, but yeah, he eats really well, and I learned from them. My first training passage was with his proteges, and they were called Nathan and Vivian of a boat named Ultima,
Hmm.
and their job was taking people out offshore, and they didn't have an agenda. They just took people out, and as stuff happened, they're like, "This is what you do when this stuff happens." It's such a great trip, and you never stop learning stuff with them.
Yeah.
Anyway, long story short, is holy moly, did we eat good on that trip, and that was so neat to be exposed to that first, because that became my bar. Like anytime I went on a trip, we're gonna eat well. It was just what you did on boats, in my mind. And there are plenty of trips where it's a new captain or a new owner every time, and the range in what people are tolerant of in their food especially when they're offshore, is fascinating. I remember
Yeah.
provisioning one time with this guy. We were in Panama, getting ready to go on a big trip, and we're pushing the cart around, and I'm letting him do the thing. And I look in the cart, and it's like 90% soda, hot dogs,
Ugh.
and and Wonder Bread, white Wonder Bread. I'm like, oh,
Why is this boat getting heavier every time we have a meal?
bro. I'm like, oh my god, I can't eat that stuff for the next 3 weeks. He's
Oh
like, do
god,
you guys
yeah.
mind if we get? And he's like, but and I was like, I mean, food.
Right,
Yeah,
like
I told him, and we're just getting to know each other. It's like, bro, I love to cook offshore, and he's like, have you done it before? I said, yeah, I've cooked in the big stuff, not huge. We're not idiots. When we're seeing 10 and 16-foot waves, we'll have the hot dogs. but,
yeah.
I've gotten pretty good at cooking in the motions. And that's what Vivian taught me on that first trip we took. Holy moly. She just buckled herself in, strapped on, and she was grabbing stuff as it's flying by. Like, cause you move
Yeah.
way more than you might imagine in depending on which point of sail you're on and what part of the wind
Sure.
you're going to. So anyway,
Well,
long story
and the
short,
smaller
we
the
never have
boat,
short stories.
the
What?
smaller the boat, the more you rock, I would imagine.
Yeah. The shape of the boat depends on sometimes you'll rock more, the direction of the waves, but yeah.
And I just realized you're also dealing with a different boat every time because it's
Yeah.
not your boat you're taking around. So when you're thinking, okay, I've got to have 30 days worth of provisions, you need to know what storage the boat has, how much
Yeah.
refrigerated space, how much cabinet space. Like there's really a lot to consider that you
It's
have
a
to deal with.
full-time job, like you said.
Mhm.
Like, it's fascinating. People wonder, like, what the heck do you do all the time while you're doing that? And it's like, it is nonstop from the second you get off the plane. Because remember, 99% of these are origination points are in countries that I've never been to and with that speak languages I've never spoken. And they're in a
Right.
marina that I've never been to and an owner that I've never
Mhm.
met. And guess what? Some countries don't have Uber. They have Bing or they have Didi, or it's like you have to learn how that works. And
Or they have
it's so
rickshaws.
cool. It's like it's so fun. But
Yeah.
it's the whole freaking experience from the second someone says, "Hey, could you help me move my boat?" Blah blah blah. It's the I mean, we're basically they're interviewing me and I'm definitely interviewing them because there is also a large range in the quality of vessels that are out there floating or not floating or barely
Mhm.
floating. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So you got to ask all these questions to see if you're not going to put yourself in a dangerous situation.
Well,
And
not only just physically, but I mean, there's the business side of it. Are they a legitimate person? Are they somebody who is going to pay me and not just try and get me to do this and then stiff me at the end of it? I mean,
oh yeah, because that's
there's,
happened. And other
yeah,
times they're upfront about it. You're like, this is a free kick. So there's a lot of people that will do this kind of stuff for free because it's exciting. But as you get a bunch of skills, and I've gained a bunch of miles now, where it's fair to ask for a small pay each day.
yeah.
It's wow. I've never made less money, but never been richer in my life, I say.
Well, I mean, as long as you can cover your bills, right? As long as that you've at least got the bare minimum for the survival part, then everything else to me, I've always felt is above. Is once I'm covered, then anything else I get is extra. So if I have a week where I make enough money to just pay the bills, all right, I got through it. If I have a week where I'm like, wow, I made 3 times what I anticipated, then awesome. That
Yeah.
money just goes in for the times that I don't make the nut.
Yeah, but
But
freelancer mindset.
yeah,
My friend, have been doing it for a bazillion years. You get it. You
it's
get
been
it.
a long time, yeah. But I don't. I mean, yeah, I'd have to depend on other people to do certain things to make sure that I can eat, because of the work I'm supplied and that. But I mean, for you, that's a pretty big investment. You can't just walk away from a job when you're in the middle of the Pacific Ocean.
Yeah, yeah. When you finally commit, it's you're committed. and
Yeah.
yeah, and sometimes that's great. Sometimes it sucks because you're like, hey, you know, because a lot of it'll work to our advantage sometimes where we're like, there's a storm coming and we got to wait for 3 days before we head out. So like, oh, twist my arm. We have to wait in Panama City for 3 days. I'll be at
Right.
the pool. Call me when you need me.
Again.
But that's how it starts. But then those 3 days, guess what we end up doing? None fucking stop boat work for 3 days because you realize how much you really weren't prepared. We're like, "God, we didn't have any fun anyway." We're
Yeah,
just
free time is a real concept, and I have to say that it's a concept because it's rarely reality when you deal with your own business. Like you can think, oh, I've got tomorrow off. I'll spend a half hour doing this, and then I'll spend the rest of the day reading or taking away whatever you
yeah,
want to
and
do,
then it
right?
becomes not even the Pareto principle, 80
Yeah.
20. It's just completely reversed where that 30-minute job you really only had 30 minutes of relaxing time, and that 30-minute job took 14 hours all day long because of
Yep.
this one bolt that wouldn't come the frick out, or the hardware store was
Mhm.
closed in town because the owner is celebrating the local holiday, like because you just don't know. That's a new
Mhm.
land, and there's a bazillion
Yeah.
things that can
Or
go
you
wrong.
had to go to 9 grocery stores to get all the tuna you needed for the trip because
Yeah,
the
yeah.
one didn't have it. Yeah, and it really turns out that and of that 30 minutes of relaxation time, 24 minutes is, yeah, I need to remember to do this. Like you actually get like 6 minutes when it comes
Just
down to
going
it,
through
you
the
know?
list of shit that I need to do when I'm done relaxing.
Yep.
That's brilliant. That's
So let
exactly.
me because one question that I like to ask touring musicians is about staying healthy, and you're going to different climates, different countries, different bacterias, different environments, different climates. How do you stay healthy going to places that your body hasn't been exposed to very much, if at all?
Such a good question. And if surprisingly, it reminds me of a story.
Ooh,
Could you imagine that?
story time.
Another oh yeah, I feel like I'm nonstop stories here. Um, yeah, I even uh it's been a lot of learning in that world for me. And awakening almost because it you we forget how easy we have it in the comforts of everyday living in a house with a car and and a comfortable town and environment, it's you're not living in a mud floor hut and things, and so you forget. But even like the tough spots aside, like just offshore for any number of days, I learned quickly through trial and error by getting injured, that you don't take anything lightly. So like if I'm here at home and I bang my arm against the pole and I get a little cut, like, oh, big deal. I got a little cut. I wouldn't use a band-aid. I probably wouldn't clean it. I just go on living. But I remember one trip. Doesn't happen on every trip, of course, but I remember on one trip we were working our butts off the first 3 days to get the boat ready to go. There was a lot of untied loose ends and a lot of things that needed buttoning up before we were going to be safe offshore, or at least, but in at least comfortable. We were just working on getting safe, and then so it was nonstop scrubbing and moving things around and buckling things in and fixing a generator and just stuff that is often normal on deliveries because you're moving boats that people don't spend a lot of time on. So all this stuff falls into disarray. And anyway,
Sure.
but I
Yeah.
remember it was a stupid little. I just got a pimple on my leg, and I'm feeling that spot on my leg right now because I can almost feel it hurting. But I just got a stupid little pimple. But we were up and down and kneeling on things all day, and up and down on the deck. It was a wooden deck in some spots, and somehow I got a splinter in a pimple area, a stupid little pimple I had, but I got a splinter in it, but I didn't know I had a splinter. And like after a long day of work, I was like, oh man, that looks nasty. I didn't notice that I had that. And it's like, and then I'm looking at it like, I pull out a little splinter and I'm like, all right, cool, it's fine. But, you know, we were leaving the next day and we go offshore and it's just getting worse and worse and worse. And I'm like, I'm turning into a real pirate. Like, oh my God, my whole leg is red. And like, it's like, oh my
Wow.
God, I should have done something more with this when we're on land. I shouldn't have hurried offshore because now we're fucked. I'm offshore and we're on a boat where half of the owners were Austrian or Belgies. I don't know what is in Belgium. I can't remember. Oh, I feel like an idiot. Um,
Belgians.
Belgians, yeah. It was either Austrian or German. Um, the owners, but the boat was French or Swedish. I can't remember, but the boat was the thing. The instructions on the boat were in one language, and all the things that the owners had on the boat were in another language. So, i.e., all of the first aid gear was in another freaking language. So I'm like, it smells like antibiotics. It's like, so am I gonna make my thing worse or less? And it's like, so finally we're just like, so we're when we get close enough to land to get signal, and I'm like trying to be able to Google things and learn what it is, and oh man, and I think this was the same trip where um, I had just made a new friend. He was a diver, and he was a French guy, and he traveled with um, a small first aid kit. I also traveled with a first aid kit, but I didn't have anything to take care of this infection that I was getting. The leg was getting
Mm.
like more and more infected and it's just painful. Uh, so anyway, I was like, yeah, I'll take anything right now because I can't read this shit and whatever you have, you know it is. So anyway, he comes out of his cabin with this container, not no label, just this container of white powder. I'm like, oh my God, this doesn't feel good.
Oh no.
But he's like, put this on your leg. I'm like, I guess, but do you know if it's sulfa based? Because I know I have a sulfa allergy that it won't go well if that gets in my bloodstream. But he's like,
Yeah.
no sé, señor. He didn't say that because he was
Did
French.
he at least know the dealer he got it from?
No, it was an antibiotic of sorts, but he didn't know the full makeup of it. And I was like,
Wow.
I closed
Yeah,
my eyes and
but
dumped
yet
it on
he
my
was perfectly confident for you to try it.
leg. Exactly. It ended up not doing anything and not getting any better. It did nothing. So I must have had whatever antibiotic it was. It was either out of date or my body was already used to it or whatever. So
Mm.
we ended up figuring out with one of the things was in the first aid kit that was a triple ointment, basically
Okay.
synonymous with a triple ointment antibiotic. So it's like,
Mhm.
ooh. I don't know if that'll help, but it's not going to hurt. I'm not going to get worse than what it is now. So let me smear that shit on there. And
Yeah, I mean, you could put like anti-bee sting on there, and it's not gonna hurt it.
exactly. And it's like, so yeah, but it was a great learning because it was a stupid, simple, innocuous or a superfluous, I don't know what the word is, but it was a non-emergency injury that got really close to being a very big setback in a trip,
Yeah.
because if I start getting fevery and that now I'm a liability on a boat that's offshore, and not only am I not able to help the crew sail this boat because we're only 4 people on the 49-foot boat. Now there are 3 people, and that immediately changes the landscape in the nightly watch routine.
Right.
And
Yeah.
it's a 25% less crew if I'm like in bed with a fever. And as if you're getting hit with some ailments, your body starts getting hit harder by the environment that you're in, so you're going to be more prone to getting seasick. You're going to be more prone to just being a piece of shite on the boat
Yeah.
because you're not at 100%. So like, yeah, it was a great lesson in like, man, like it's just a splinter now, but take care of it. Put a
Yeah.
Band-Aid on it. You don't have to be macho. You keep the dirt out of keep the
But
blood
and
in and the
you're
water out, which is basically
yeah. But then you're increasing the danger for everyone else, because if they're all adding another third to their work to make up for you, now they're more at risk because they're paying less attention and trying to get more things done. And I mean, that's a huge dynamic change. I'm
That's a
glad you're
great point.
okay. But my question now is, do you carry Neosporin in your first aid kit?
Dude.
Okay, good.
I think half of my first aid kit, if I were to lay it out on the table, I would like, oh, let me tell you why I have started carrying this, and let me tell you why I started carrying this. And I sure do. I have Neosporin written in the language that I understand. It doesn't have to be English, but it
Right.
has to be either English or Spanish.
Yeah, it has to be identifiable for sure.
It has to
And
be
yeah, I mean, but the difference is, I think, is that you listened and you took that experience and you learned and you adjusted. I wonder how many people take the lesson and go, well, that probably won't happen again, and don't take that precaution for that potential next time.
Yeah. It's neat because you've identified one of the things I love about the new job that I think is going to be the job I do until I die. So, I hope to be 100. So my last 50 years is going to be this stuff, I think. But yeah, it caused me to, the first trip, I'm like, let me take a couple of Band-Aids. The second trip, I'm like, ooh, let me take a couple of Band-Aids and an ace bandage because I needed that last time. And again, maybe nothing happened on that first trip, but I had more time to think about what I needed.
Mhm.
And then slowly the kit gets a few things that it's like, this has a story of why I carry it. But also it starts when I'm on watch, for 3 hours a night alone. Everyone else is sleeping and it's calm conditions. And like, when you think about a million things, and some of the things you think about is like, all right, what if the mast falls down right now? What am I going to do? But you
Yeah.
also think of like, what kind of first aid things would I do? And I haven't taken a lot of first aid training, but I need to up that in my thing about you. Anyway, it by failing and making some mistakes and having a pretty painful leg for a couple of days on the trip, now I have a kit that I'm prepared to help other people more than I would have been otherwise. And I remember just 3 trips ago, somebody else got hurt,
Mhm.
and he ran out of the whatever Band-Aids he was using for his thing, and I was like, sure, let me take care of you. And I was like,
Yeah.
and you get a very small amount of space to work with, especially when you're traveling all these different spots. You go from Uber to airport to little airport to smaller airport to a little boat with an outboard engine that takes you to the dock. So it's like you can't carry a bunch of suitcases of shit. Yeah, basically.
That's a good point. I didn't really think about the getting it to the boat
Yeah,
issue. So you
yeah.
can't be like, well, we ran out of honey, so I'm bringing a beehive. And no, that's
Yeah.
really interesting. I would think that, I mean, for me, like, I'm not big on travel. I love being on the water, but I'm not big on travel. So for me to go to countries where I don't speak the language would terrify me, because I'm a pretty safe person. Like I don't really put myself in positions like I could never go on the Amazing Race or even to 7-Eleven or anything like that.
I love that they're in the same breath. You said the Amazing Race, 7-Eleven, both of them.
It's yeah, six and one half. But yeah,
There's
so
ice in both of them. One comes in a Slurpee.
I mean, the whole idea of that would really be outside of my comfort zone. I mean, if you're in a position where you have to deal with it, yeah, you do what you need to do. But even when I went to Montreal for Christmas one time, I learned enough French to where if there was some kind of emergency, I could at least flag people down and let them know there was an emergency. You know,
Yeah.
in French, and I felt very confident in the French I could speak at the time to be able to do that. But to just like, okay, now I'm going to go to a Spanish speaking company. Okay, now I'm going to be in German speaking territory. Like that's way out of my zone. So for you, was that something that you just kind of adapted to pretty easily?
Sometimes easily, sometimes not. Some it's I love every there's a every answer so far has been gray, not black and white, right? But some trips, like I could still remember this one captain slash owner who was like he had no interest in learning the language and speaking the language of the area, so he would always count on me. So my Spanish got pretty good. But then another trip, man, this guy. I try not to say names, but I love this guy, so I want to say his name. But keep it generic for you. Um, uh,
Billy.
he was really good at his Spanish, so my Spanish got pretty weak. Not weak, but I wasn't counting on myself as much as because I knew he would do it. But yeah, when the need is there, it's yeah, your body just steps up. You're like, shit, I got to figure this out. And a lot of pointing and grunting when you don't know the language tends to work. But it's also part of the experience. Is like because just making that effort 99% of the time, people want to get to know you. You know, I remember one time another story popped in my head. It was a long day. I was taking care of a boat. I wasn't on a trip. I was at the boat. The owner was gone, back to work, but I was taking care of a few projects that didn't get finished and staying on the boat at the same time. Anyway, I would go. There was a free taxi that went into town every morning, so I would go into town, do some grocery shopping, and then it it came back around after like 4 hours and would pick you up again, and it was free. So it was like again, you're not getting paid much, so I tried to keep that. But anyway, I was just getting done in the grocery store, but it's a long walk back to the taxi stand where the taxis are boats, not cars. So I was just taking a breather. It's 100 degrees in tropics. Sitting on the curb with all the groceries there. And I'm pretty white guy, pretty white guy in the middle of Panama, sitting on the street. And I remember this guy that I had seen a couple of times already. So I had seen him around, and like we didn't know each other, but like we weren't familiar, but he wasn't an absolute stranger. And he walked by and he said good morning to me in English, and I said buenos tardes and a couple of things in Spanish to him, and he was just walking by and kept on walking. But when I returned his answer in Spanish, he screeched to a halt, turned around, and gave me his fist out like a fist bump said. He's like, and he started talking with me and
Oh,
asking me questions. He was immediately engaged and like, hey, thanks for taking a minute to like.
yeah.
I was so white that he initiated the conversation to me in English, but I was like, no, sir, that we're not going that. I'm not going to fall back on that. I'm going to speak to you as you should be spoken to in your town. And
That's awesome because I think it's typical that people assume because so many countries have English speaking people that we have the right to speak English in their country and
yeah,
like they should just cater to us.
it's heartbreaking sometimes to hear ignorant Americans and
Yeah.
doing a thing, and they're like, "Why won't anyone answer my question?" It's like because you're speaking in English, you dumb son of a.
Well, one of the things that we talked about before we started recording was I had asked you about the internet and you got all excited. You were going to tell me a story. I'm like, wait, let's save it for the podcast.
Oh, I
So,
don't remember now.
oh, fine. Well, what I was asking you was like, because I was thinking about, that idea I had of building the recording studio on the boat, just being on a boat, not owning a house or whatever. But of course, dock rent is far more than I would pay in rent in an apartment anyway, as I came to find out.
In
But
some places, you'd be
in some
surprised how
places,
cheap.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah. probably the places that you need to be would be.
Right. But what is the reality of your connection to the world when you're out in the middle of the ocean? How much communication do you actually have?
Yes, that I remember now talking about that with you because I got really excited because like we have witnessed history in the making between the two podcasts that we had together. like
Really?
when we
Okay.
spoke in 2019, um, there was one state of the union in technology, and then it was probably being developed, but I knew nothing of it. But now in 2024, uh, there are satellites up there that basically give you internet all around the world. So
Wow.
with Starlink, we don't always have that benefit on a boat. It's very expensive still, so it's in its early adoption stages still.
Yeah.
And just when it gets affordable, they jack up the prices, and like everyone that had bought into the affordable thing, now they're so there's a lot of commotion in the industry. So and
Yeah.
I don't know as much as I should know about it because I don't have my own boat and I don't manage my own Starlink subscription. So there's a lot I don't know
Yet. I would
yet.
say you don't have your own satellite yet.
Yet. That's a very good point. But yeah, just today I had a conversation with a feller who has a really nice boat, and that's another big thing that's changed since last time we talked. I've definitely gone from I don't have my own boat yet, but I definitely am way more serious, and the search is on. But that might be for episode 3 of our reunion.
Mm,
But but yeah, so a couple of levels of communication out there now for those of you watch. And um, the first thing that I ever bought that is now critical kit gear or a delivery kit gear for me is the Garmin InReach. It's a satellite device, a satellite tracking device, satellite communication device. So it's like the old sat phones. It's
oh, okay.
basically so it has basic text messaging capabilities. It has onboard maps. So hikers use it all the time. People who do big off road or big motorcycle trips, who are out and about often and far in remote areas, and certainly on the sailing trips, we use that. And it's not like a phone where you can get on the phone and talk, although those exist. The one that I have is basic text messaging to and from,
Mhm.
and the ability to send short messages to a map while I'm tracking our route. So it's super
Okay.
helpful, and
Yeah.
it's on my website now. Where you go to the top tab where in the navigation bar it says locate, and right now it's inaccurate. It'll tell you that I'm in Crescent City, California, because that's where we were last, and
Ah,
I haven't turned it on since we left there, so it thinks I'm still there.
right. Well, you
Uh,
wouldn't need to let people know where you live necessarily.
that's probably the
Probably
not
a
in
good thing.
right
See,
now.
that's
I could, and it's not going to get me in any trouble. But one day I'm going to be so famous that I don't want people to know where
well,
I
that's
live.
when you build a moat.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
I that's kind of what I pictured was like the satellite phone from Jurassic Park 3, just that, maybe not that obnoxious
Go
ring,
on. Ta-da!
but like yeah, that long phone that looks like the old Zach Morris brick cell phone, and that would be kind of more along the lines of what you would have, because I would think that I wouldn't think that internet would be a thing that would be spread across the ocean because there wouldn't be enough constant need for it to cover the world.
Yeah, but now, yeah, like so in 2021 there wasn't much Starlink, and that's when I was starting my long passages. So I got the Garmin. I think Starlink was around. I just didn't hear much about it. But once I got in the community, like, oh man, just in the last year, 2 years, everyone has it now, and it's like a broadband internet on your boat anywhere in on the planet. So like in the middle of nowhere where it's a blessing and a curse because go on these trips to get away
Yeah.
and
Right.
you don't want that internet to be following you. But at the same time, in the old day, well, in the old days is a whole other story. But in my old days, which is not very old, just 2017 is when I started. We would do a lot of research on the weather patterns in the area that we're sailing. We would look at what are
Yeah.
called, oh my goodness, I can't remember the name now. Pilot charts. You look at pilot charts, and those are um, over the many, many, many years that we've been tracking the weather systems and all these things, it's the aggregate of what we expect in an area of the planet at a time of the year.
Mhm.
And so you learn the pilot charts, and you know about what kind of wind you're going to expect, and about kind of what currents you're going to expect along the route. What is it stormy? Is it hurricane season? What season is it? Blah, blah, all these things. And then right before you go, you look 10 days out and you get the weather forecast. And you don't leave until the weather's good. And weather forecast is pretty accurate 3 days out, 4 days out, but it gets very inaccurate very quickly out to about 10 days. And anywhere after 10
Yeah.
days, it's just like,
Well,
you might as well say it's going to rain monkeys, because it's going to change by the time
right.
it comes into the new window. So
That
we
would be
would
great if you're a
want
monkey
to,
collector, though. I mean, you know, but I
yeah,
feel like, okay, so I'm thinking of the days, I don't know if they still make this anymore, but like the old world almanacs, where they would take that culmination of data of, weather patterns over the last, say, 200 years and say, okay, well, I think December 14th, it's probably going to snow because typically on December 14th over the last 200 years, it snows. But I really feel like so much has changed in our climate that,
boom,
that
you just
none of
nailed
that
it.
matters anymore.
Yeah. And, it's a fascinating world we live in, where there are people that think that climate change is a hoax. um, and even more fascinating thing is to see how that divides across party lines. I don't want to get too much into politics here, but I promise you, sailing is pretty even distribution of parties in the sailing world. Well, American, thinking of American
Mhm.
politics, um, but you will not find a single boater or sailor out there that doesn't think climate change is real.
Well, you guys see it.
Because they're in it. You're in it,
Yeah.
and you see it, and especially people who have been sailing for years or been on a boat in 20, 30 years of their lifetime. It's almost completely unpredictable now. We just had a hurricane on the west coast of Mexico that decimated Acapulco, and it's the other very famous thing. We stopped at both places. Gosh darn it! Um, but it was unheard of. It was
Mhm.
a hurricane-free zone that
Yeah.
is no longer a hurricane-free zone there. Same
Well,
thing with Panama was where we took our boats to be
yeah.
safe below a certain latitude. Uh, and a hurricane just went over Panama 2 years ago.
Well, we've had blizzards in Dallas, and where even in the wintertime it's pretty warm.
Yeah.
I
So
remember,
it's
I grew
different.
up just outside of Detroit, and we left right before I turned 16. So the first, decade and a half of my life I spent there. There was not a single winter where you could see the grass. Like the snow started in October, it starts going away in March. Through that
Yeah,
whole time, you will not see a blade of grass. And now they've had winters where you almost see no snow, where
yeah,
there's nothing that sticks to the ground, very little for the entire season. And I'm like, there's no way you can't tell me that something hasn't changed, whether
yeah,
it's for the reasons that people think, or whatever, they can debate that all they want. But at the end of the day, if you look at weather patterns over the decades, the earth has changed. Now,
yeah,
whether that's a natural shift or that's because of, what we've done to it with all the fossil fuels, or a combination of those two things, people can think whatever they want. At the end of the day, the result, you can't argue that it's different
it's
than it
different.
was 100 years ago.
And where people get stuck is like, we've had ice ages in the past, it gets cold. Well, yes, that's true.
Yeah.
And we even had an ice age pretty fucking recently when you think about the geological time. Sorry, I don't want to leap this
That's
stuff.
it. No, I'm kidding. No, it's
Uh,
fine.
but what it's not the fact that the temperature is rising and the climate is changing. It's the rate at which it's happening, because
Right.
we always get hot and cold cycles over the 300 million years that we're able to deduce what the temperature has been by coring ice in the Arctic. But when you look at that curve, it's like, this is how it goes, and there's this trend, and now we're like, bam, like,
Yeah.
so we're talking about the rate of change, not the fact that it's getting warmer. And the other thing that people get stuck on always is global warming. We used to call it global warming. And everyone's like, this was the coldest winter we ever had. This global warming is BS. Like, that's not how it works. It's
Yeah.
it's just not
It's
how it
it's
works.
not it's not like boiling water.
Yeah, I mean,
But I think that's the thing is
you're
people get a concept into their head and then they just think that's what it is without doing the research, without really learning what it's all about, and then that becomes the definition of it for them. Because
yeah.
let's face it, I mean, we live in a fairly lazy society now where we just expect somebody's going to tell us and we trust that that's the right thing and we don't look into it any further or think for ourselves. We wait for somebody else to tell us what to think.
Tell me what I need to
And
know. Tell me what I need to think. Yeah.
yeah, it's a very sad commentary on where we are. I don't like the lack of curiosity, I think, that I see in a lot of people
Ooh,
today.
well
For
said.
me, I wanna know what's behind it. Like, I really wanna know how the pyramids were built. That one just will stick with me until we have a reasonable answer. And, people say, "Well, the ground was harder back then." Okay, well, that stone is still 60 tons, and there are thousands of them, so I don't think that logs could really hold up to rolling 60-ton stones. I don't know what kind of trees they had, but I'm pretty sure
Yeah,
that they would
yeah.
have flattened out pretty easily. And how did they carry them uphill? Well, they just had a lot of slaves. Well, you can only have so much force. Not
Yeah,
everybody's muscles are going to be used on one rope. Like
yeah.
it just
9 women can't have a one baby in a month, right?
right, yeah.
So, like, there's a
Yeah.
certain threshold you reach that you just can't get any more energy out
Right.
of the system.
Yeah, and then there's I saw this wonderful video of you're familiar with Easter Island, right? All the Moa statues on Easter Island.
Yeah,
So there was a picture of these people literally walking a Moa statue down a path, like on grass, and they're just rocking it back and forth, and that's how they're moving it. And I thought, that's brilliant. If that's how they moved it from the quarry to, the island where they set it, that's brilliant.
yeah.
But that doesn't necessarily mean that's how they did it.
Right,
That's
right.
one possible way
How
that they
these
might
guys
have
did
done it.
it.
But what they didn't explain is that the quarries were underground. So how did they get these ridiculously heavy and long statues from the underground quarry up to even be able to walk it? Like they couldn't
Yes,
figure
and
that part out.
what they absolutely forgot to tell you is that these underground quarries were on Mars. So how did we get from Mars?
Right. Yeah.
Couldn't resist, couldn't resist.
I blame the rover.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah,
Oh, man.
it's just fascinating the perceptions that people have, but I think the bigger problem is just the lack of curiosity, the lack of, okay, but how does that work? Like you're
Yeah, yeah,
telling
yeah.
me that. Like I'll never dispute that we didn't go to the moon in 68 or 69 or whatever it was. Like I'm not saying that didn't happen, but explain to me how it worked. Like the biggest argument I've heard against it is getting through the Van Allen belt. So, okay, great. If they were able to do that, that's awesome. Just tell me how it worked so I can understand.
Yeah, yeah.
And then I can get behind this whole thing. I mean, because I honestly think that we might have gone. I won't dispute that we didn't. I think we might have. But I think a lot of the video footage that we've seen was filmed in a studio because they
Really? Yeah,
wanted backup footage in case, how did they get to be able to televise live from the moon? I'm 4 feet away from my modem. I can't get more than 2 bars on my phone. So how in the late 60s did they do that? But I think they filmed backup footage because there's a lot of questionable stuff they found in the footage, like people obviously being on wires and that sort of thing. I think they filmed that as footage in case they couldn't transmit or in case there was a problem or something happened out there. They would never have let the public know that there were aliens on the moon or creatures on the moon that harmed our astronauts or anything like that. So I think they had the footage in the can ready to go, and that's what they broadcast, but that's not what actually happened.
really?
Yeah.
Okay. I didn't know
So I
this.
think it's a combination of the conspiracy theory and reality. I think we probably did go. I'm sure they figured out how to get through that Van Allen belt well before they went out there and tried to do it. I don't doubt that, but just explain to me how they did it. Because that lunar lander, I mean, it looked like an Atari cartridge. That thing was not very impressive.
Yeah, and it's made there's basically it's not even sheet metal on the outside, it's aluminum foil. It's
Yeah,
thinner than that. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. So I'm like, well, I mean, maybe you went really fast. you know,
I didn't
I
know
don't
that
know.
about you that you are yeah, yeah.
I think
Hey.
a lot. I think logistically, like, just give me. something I can latch onto and understand, and I'll probably be fine with it. Like I will say, okay, that may or may not have been the way it happened, but at least I can understand there's a plausible explanation for how it happened, as opposed to, no, you're fine. We went through it. Hey, look over there.
Not the droid. These are not the droids. Yeah.
So I tend to think a lot. And when I think about like the theories of how they think the pyramids were built, like they just don't make sense to me. I'm not saying it's not possible, but I have a hard time imagining that they built these 60,000 ton stones 500 miles away. And they're saying we floated them down the river. Like on what? They would sink.
Yeah.
You know?
That's interesting. That's I forget about these wonderful mysteries.
So the
It would be
newest
good on
theory
a
that I've
sailboat,
heard,
bro, because these are the things that, as the sun's going down, we talk about a lot of stuff
yeah,
to divert our minds from the absolute fear and terror of sailing into the darkness. It's
oh
kind of scary
yeah,
sometimes.
yeah. Well,
It's really
I
not.
mean, the most recent theory I've heard, and I think this makes sense because of our history that we've uncovered, whether we've made it public or, because a lot of stuff they're not changing. Like they'll learn things, but they won't change the history books. They'll keep teaching what we knew and go, oh shit, that didn't really happen that way. But is that there have been several layers of advanced civilizations on Earth over the thousands of years, and they built things that we don't understand. And the reason we can't understand how they built them is because we don't see what the technology was. We don't know what they had, what they did, how they did it. And we're trying to solve them based on what we know and what we can do, and we can't do what they did.
Yep.
So it's an unsolvable equation because we don't have their knowledge. And I'm like, you know what? That kind of makes sense, because I'm sure at some point we'll blow ourselves up and then somebody else will come and go, hey, look, free planet.
That's legit, because I just remember I love Neil deGrasse Tyson, and I just watched I love watching him speak,
Mhm.
listening to him speak, but usually it's video, so watching him speak.
He's not shy.
Oh, you're not, and he's just funny and fun and smart, but he reminded us, because I'll say reminded, because I believe this is true to be happening, but the universe is as we come to understand it, the universe is expanding, and not only is it expanding, but the rate of its expansion is increasing. So over the next millennia, not only are the galaxies that we see now getting farther away, they're getting farther away at a faster rate,
Mhm.
exponentially. I don't
Right.
know if it's exponential, but
Yeah.
some quadratic or something non-linear.
Right.
Um, and at a certain point, this is Neil deGrasse Tyson, I'm paraphrasing now, at a certain point, it's going to expand so far that the nearest galaxies that we can see expand past our horizon, our view.
Mhm.
And right now that's getting bigger. Like we're able to see farther and farther because of our advancements. So like what used to be look like a star, now we have telescopes that be like, oh shit, that's Andromeda. That's a freaking galaxy.
Yeah.
Cool. I thought that was
Yeah.
just a star. And now the iPhone can tell you that that's a galaxy. You can get close. You could get a picture of Andromeda for the new iPhone. I'm like, oh my god,
It's
blow my
insane.
mind.
Yeah.
But anyway, so he posited that so we know that's happening now, and eventually these galaxies are going to be. So for people studying space millions of years from us, should we still have not blown up the planet by then, are going to be trying to figure stuff out without the aid of these visible stars. It might be just a black sky, right? Who knows? We don't
Mhm.
know how.
Right.
So what's to say then that we're not in one of those horizons right now? Like enough stuff has gone far enough away out of our view that we're trying to piece it all together, but we don't have. It's impossible to put
Yeah.
together what we could put together if we would have had. But we will never know, right? Because it's what you can't see, what you don't know, you don't know. So,
Mhm.
so that answers your like. What if the same thing is true about those societies on Earth? Like the Atlantis theory
Mhm.
and seriously, the Aztecs and the Incas and the Maya, they just disappeared, right? Like now I'm
Right.
starting
Yeah.
Trump by the Aztecs and the Mayans. I didn't mean
But here's something to think about. If the universe is expanding, And I would
Maybe.
love to ask Neil deGrasse Tyson this question. I think he's very intelligent. I have a hard time listening to him sometimes because he comes off as very arrogant.
Oh
And
yeah, yeah,
I don't like that. I just talk to me like I'm a person. And maybe if I was like this, having a conversation with him, it would be a little bit different. But he always comes with the I'm talking to you from here kind of attitude for me. But anyway, but he's very smart. And the question I'd like to ask him is if the universe is expanding, that has to mean that it's expanding into some other space. And if that's the case, what the fuck is on the other side?
exactly. That's the obvious question.
Because I kind of think of it as like a sphere, right? And if the universe is expanding, the sphere is getting bigger, but there's something outside of that that we're expanding into, which is kind of rude and insensitive. But
Right. Because
like,
whoever's
what is
got
it?
that other universe, they're like, hey, yo, neighbor,
I'm
turn
working
that leaf
here.
blower off, for fuck's sake. You're in my yard.
So so there's a question you could ask on the boat, like when you guys are figuring out life, you could posit that out to everyone.
But now here's where I will make it even more. This is like we're both smoking a bong and but not smoking the bong. This is bong talk. But
Yeah, imagine what I would be like if I did drugs. I mean, look at how I am
I
now.
want to meet this version of you. Yeah, yes, version of us even. But so
Where's that
that's
powder your friend had?
yeah. It does. You would be amazing. Like not only does it help an infected leg, but
That's right.
holy
It'll
moly,
make you see Jesus.
yeah. The only reason it helped my leg is because I flew home to the hospital on my own power.
You do see birds out there.
Yeah, you really do, and you fly
Yeah.
over. But now, so that thinking that the universe is expanding into something is only logic governed by your three-dimensionally trained mind.
Right.
Right? Neil will tell you that. So, like, you have to think of like we think in three dimensions, so that's what. But it's most likely, or in fact, it might even be proven that it's not three. So it's not even expanding into something or it's expanding into itself, or I don't even know. So yeah, I'm stoned now. No, I'm just kidding.
Have
But
you
there was a great example of trying to think like that, to understand that thinking by taking it down to two-dimensional thought,
Mhm.
by imagining you're an ant on a piece of paper and you're following this line around, and you're just walking around the piece of paper, and eventually the line you get to the end of the paper and that's the end. That's that. So you turn around and you're back, and so your whole world is on this little piece of paper. But
Mhm.
if you were to take that paper and take from the two dimensions just lying flat on the table and bend it into a circle and connect the line on the other side, now we're talking three dimensions, right? Instead
Right.
of just
Yeah.
a y, now we have a z, and now that ant is living. But and I forget what the analogy was, but
And I've heard that about the universe, that it's kind of like it's not like there's not an end to it. It's kind of curved that gives it the appearance of endless when
yeah.
it's really not, you
And
know.
that curve is like that's still three dimensions, but it feels like four to the ant, or vice versa. It's
Mhm.
three three dimensions, but it feels like two to the ant because it really is just still. I can't remember. I have to study
I
like
know what you're
really.
saying though. And that
Yeah.
leads me to a question. Have you ever read a book called Flatland?
No.
You should read that book.
All right. I have to start taking notes now.
I can't remember who wrote it, but it's not a very long book. And even at that, I could not get through it.
Flatland. I'm gonna make a notepad right here. Oh, I
The,
forgot to ask you in the beginning of this if
yeah.
you do you go back and edit, or is the podcast basically just start stop and you run it the whole unedited published, or do you go back and cut?
Mainly, I just chop up everything you say into new sentences.
Exactly. And
No, I
trust
just
me, I worked in post audio and I know you can really
you
tell
could do
a
that. Yeah.
lot of different stories, especially the more words you get.
That's
You tend
right.
to talk a lot.
No, I very rarely edit anything out anymore. The only
I
time I
thought
will is typically if a guest says something that they shouldn't have said
incriminating.
on air. Like because a lot of times people get so comfortable they forget that we're recording a podcast, and they'll tell me
Yes.
things, and I'm like, I'll send them a clip and go, I don't think you were supposed to talk about that. Do you want me to cut that out? And they're like, yes, please.
Yeah.
You
But that's
know,
kudos to you. That means you're a good interviewer. And even I have forgotten that this was, being recorded at a certain point, and I love
yeah.
the camera. So
But it feels like it's just you and I having a conversation. Because again, like we talked
yeah,
about
it should.
before we started recording, I'm not like, Okay, question 1, check. Let me ask you question 2, get my answer, check. Like we're just talking.
Yeah, and that's what makes things interesting, and that's why, like, I feel old when I say at one point podcasts were new to me and you, right? Like you're
Mhm.
old enough to have lived in a world of many years when podcasts weren't a thing.
Oh yeah.
And I think the only thing that so when you think about it, you're like, if you were to tell the future me, come back to the past me and say, hey, in the future, much of the world is going to sit on YouTube and watch other people talking about anything.
Right.
And they're gonna
Yeah.
love it. And people are gonna like that doesn't sound interesting to me, but it is. And it's
Yeah.
fascinating how interesting it is and how more interesting it is when what we talked about earlier, when you are curious and want to know rather than just asking question after question after question. When you're genuinely curious, and that makes me genuinely excited to talk about it, and then you're even more curious, and it becomes fascinating to watch. And
Yeah.
it's like,
I think
yeah,
so. I think people
my
flow
own
into
genre
that
now.
that conversation and they'll probably go, you know what? How do you do that? How do you prepare food for 45 days and that kind
We
of
never
thing?
did I, as is my custom, I don't think I answered that
I don't think you
question.
did. Yeah. Well, you kind
Uh,
of did. Yeah, but the challenge really, I think, with that is just knowing the space that you're going to have available to you.
yeah,
Because like
and
I
there's
said,
not many
it's not
trips
your
where
boat. It's a different boat every time.
every time, yeah, and
Yeah.
not many trips where we had to where I think it was maybe 1, maybe 2 most, where uh, I met the crew at the airport and we went provisioning and then went to the boat. Like usually the crew kind of meanders and reaches the boat 1 or 2 days apart. We spend a day on the boat and then we're fixing. Oh, just know that you're always fixing. Like when we're just hanging out on the boat, that probably means one dude's in the engine compartment changing the oil. Then I'm over in the forward head trying to change the sump pump, and we're just hanging out having beers and talking to each other. But you're always working on something
Yeah.
because
It's
the shit is
it,
just always
it
broken.
it's
It's
not
just a fun
Cheetos and whale
environment.
watching. I'm sure.
Yeah, but
When I was at Newport Beach, I did see some, there's always otters because they hang out by the pier,
oh, I love
trying to grab
otters.
the fish
They're
that because
fun
there's people
animals.
fishing off the pier. But I saw dolphins, which was kind of unexpected. I didn't really think about what might be near the shore. I always think about those things like out in the ocean and not coming that close inland. And then I saw these blasts of air and water coming
Oh,
up, and I'm like, the hell is that? And I texted my friend who lived in Huntington Beach at the time, and she goes, "Oh, it's probably a whale." Like whales?
what?
Seriously? At Huntington or Newport Beach? I'm like, whales? No way.
Right?
The water can't be that deep. But I mean, it is.
Yeah.
You don't have to go that far offshore for the water to get real deep real quick.
Oh, yeah.
But you don't think about that. You think about, you're close to shore, you see like there's the water line and just kind of ducking down a little bit, but no, it just drops right off.
Yeah, some areas it'll go from 20 feet to 2,000 in 20 feet. You're like,
Yeah,
"What? Wow."
it's pretty crazy.
That's usually real good fishing. They get those
Oh
ledges.
yeah.
That's awesome.
So
Yeah, I
I
saw my
wanted,
first whale on this last trip,
oh, you
and we
did?
saw many whales. So I went from never seeing a whale to, like, I'm bored of whales. No, I really wasn't, but
Was it
but we
like
saw pilot
breaching the
whales.
surface or?
Yes, and we saw really far out, you could see the spouts, and that's all you see. But then a
Mhm.
little bit closer, we would see schools of them. And the guy was smart enough, the really great captain, the skipper. He's got hundreds of thousands of miles under his belt too. Um, but he knew they were pilot whales, which is you could tell, and I could tell now, but I didn't know at the time. But their dorsal fin is really far back towards their whatever the anterior, I forget what the end fin is called, but like a humpback, you'll see the fin is like their dorsal fin's like sort of in the middle.
Yeah.
If they have
I
a
think
dorsal fin.
most whales are about in the middle, aren't they?
Yeah, yeah, or at least
Yeah.
dolphins. I don't know if a humpback even has a dorsal. Now I gotta look that up. Damn it. But
Oh, I don't know if it does or not.
but yeah, the pilot whales, it's like almost uncomfortably far back. So now you could spot them in a really far away, and they're a little smaller, and they're usually solid black, really cool guys. Um, and we would see them like 50 yards out, spouting and going. So you a good view. But one night, oh man, it was still the sun was up, but right at the edge of the water, and I was getting ready to go down for a nap because I was leaving captain on watch. And it's so hard not to say names. This-
I know.
'cause he's my buddy. He's my buddy, and I owe him a message actually. Um, but anyway, I was just about to turn around, and I was my back to the companionway, which is the stairs down below, and he was at the wheel, looking out because he was on watch, but we were handing it off. So uh he was officially on, I guess technically, but we were both sort of there, and so we're both responsible until I left, or until I handed it off. Technically. Anyway, sorry. I'm
It's all
getting
right.
buried in the boat semantics. Anyway, so I'm like looking at his face, talking to him, and he's looking past me and looking to the sides while I'm looking to the other sides that he's not seeing. And we're talking, and all of a sudden he's just like a ghost, white, and he's not saying anything. And it felt like 5 minutes, but it was maybe not even a half of a second. And I was like, and then I heard it, and it went like usually way out you'll hear the spouts, and they're like like a lot of
Mhm.
treble, a lot of
Yeah,
high water spray.
right.
But I'm getting goosebumps talking about this. Got our little feller. I don't think it was a pilot whale. I think it was bigger because it was like all about the bass, about the bass. It was like, ooh, not like but like you. It just was a monster rush of air right beside us, and I swear to God, it was like the size of a 5-gallon bucket, like a hole like that big. Um, and it wasn't even the whale breathing; it was just the pocket of water rushing up with him as
Uh-huh.
his tail comes out of the water. Right, like I could reach out and touch it, and it was just
Wow.
tail. And then that woo sound that we heard wasn't the spout of water coming out, which you usually see. It was he had already done that and was taking a deep breath in to go below,
Mhm.
to do a deep dive. Because usually when you see their big tails out of the water, that's when they're going vertical to go deep and go dive in. When you just see the spout and no tail, they're just bopping along and
Mhm.
hanging out on the surface. But
Right.
oh my God, it was the most incredible experience ever. I've never been that close to
Wow.
a whale. I don't know if it was a whale. I only saw the tail. So
Well, even at 50 yards, I mean, that's pretty close when you think about their size versus
yeah,
what your boat could withstand if they landed near you, even just
yeah. They're
the
polite
splash
little
alone
buggers
could throw
because
you off.
they get so close and they don't they like they we've been together on the planet long enough that they're kind to us. Now, orca is another story. That's a whole other story. But
Yeah.
yeah, but imagine this was not 50 yards. This was like 5 feet. This tail was
Wow.
so huge, and it's dripping with water, and it smells like fish.
Oh, man, I didn't even think about that. Yeah.
Holy moly! And yeah, my buddy, the captain, was like, and yeah, when you're on watch, you may not hear them or see them, but if we were talking how you don't really, there's no smells and the sounds are minimal out there. But all of a sudden, that you might be hanging out at the wheel on the watch, minding your own business, and all of a sudden you're like, holy crap! It smells like fish. What is that? It's a whale way up ahead who just went and blew its
Wow.
spout. It smells like fish.
That must be incredibly strong to linger in the air that long, though.
Yeah, or they're super close. You don't hear. Yeah,
Fair. Wow.
yeah.
So I want to talk about your newest endeavors and your website, but before we get to that, I do have one more question about sailing that I've kind of been dying to ask you for a while because you in an email exchange that we had a year or so ago, you kind of hinted at something, and I want to ask you about it.
I'm scared. This is exciting.
Well, you've been out on the water a lot, and there's been a lot of sightings of different things, whether they be in the water or in the air. Have you seen any other than whales, which are not? I mean, it's an intense experience, but it's not crazy. Have you seen things out there that you can't explain, or had any really interesting, bizarre occurrences? I can't tell if you froze or you're afraid to speak.
I was doing that on purpose because the FBI and CIA just heard my thoughts, thinking about. I was just about to tell you something. The answer is hell fucking yes. We've seen some
Really?
shit out there that scared
Really?
the
Okay.
shit out of me. And stuff is scary until you know what it is, and then it's like,
Yeah.
oh, that's cool.
Mhm.
but sometimes you don't get to figure out what it is, and it's gonna stay weird and scary.
Well, the
Um,
isolation has to be a factor of that, right? Like, you can't just run to land, or you can't just call the police
right,
and have
right.
them come out, like,
Yeah,
you're out there by yourselves, and you don't have a lot of places you can go.
yeah. So there's this, and this is what makes it such a, like, I love this conversation because it's a knock on my shoulder, a knock on my a tap on my door, a knock on my shoulder, a tap on my shoulder, a knock on my door to
"Come and
remember
knock at my door."
how wonderful of a opportunity it is, and exactly why, and we'll talk about it in moments from now, why the nonprofit exists. And I think everyone should have this opportunity to see the things that I've seen. I feel like Anthony Bourdain at this moment. But like it's the- it, you see your shooting stars, you got your full moons nights, you got your moonless nights where you see stars forever.
Mhm.
Um, and shooting stars are wonderful. I've seen what I call the lightning bugs of the sea, which is the bioluminescence that you often see. It almost like in the Caribbean, it's like nonstop. Every wave, every
Wow.
surf of every wave that the boat makes at night just glows purple and pink and green and
Oh, that's
sparkly like unicorn
amazing.
glitter. It's so beautiful. And sometimes you get really big patches of it. I remember one night it was with this girl Patricia. We had in the same night we saw not only the bioluminescence, which is really common and becomes like this, it's like as common as dolphins. You're just like, wow, that's cool. I love seeing it. Uh, this particular night was dead calm. It was like ice, flat ice water, and it was moonlit, I think. I don't think it was pitch black, but
Mhm.
it's way dark out there, as you might imagine.
Yeah.
The only lights we have is like a little tiny, like the light in your microwave at the top of the mast. Like it's in that was
Jeez.
70 feet away. It's like it's like nothing.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, but anyway, uh, we saw giant patches of bioluminescence. Not well, you see it on the surface often in the agitation of the surf from the waves that from the agitation that the boat hull makes, or as the waves are coming to the boat when they break near the boat, they're agitated, so they blink.
Right.
Uh, but we were seeing patches of it below the surface in this really flat, calm water, and they do only blink when they're agitated. So it was like dolphins or other fish were agitating these patches of bioluminescence, and it was like all these little circles of light and big blobs of light, like for hundreds and hundreds of yards all around us, and we're just dumbfounded, enjoying that and super calm. And we take a breath from that, and I look up and I was like, and the two of us saw it at the same time. We're just like, with no words. It wasn't a shooting star; it was space junk, like this giant, huge, burning thing, just like a meteor,
Wow.
like not a like the tiny silver streaks you see of the meteoroids out
Mhm.
there, and the Leonids and the Geminids, and they're always really cool. But this was like huge and burning orange, so it was combusting. It wasn't like, well, shooting stars are combusting too, but it's like magnesium and stuff that burns really bright silver
Mhm.
versus this like shit that a human made that burns like yellow and orange and
Right.
it looks like burning human stuff.
Mhm.
But it was so big. It was the coolest thing I've ever seen. And it
Wow.
didn't just like shooting stars will streak across the sky and go out. This went just past the horizon, and like it was still way up there, but we just
Mhm.
lost its view. Like it didn't strike in our view.
Oh, yeah.
And I don't think it struck anywhere because we didn't see it. But it was the coolest freaking thing.